Greetings, 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 everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to another in a series of webinars hosted by the Center for Reparation Research. Indeed, at the bottom of the Atlantic, there's a railroad made of human bones. Black ivory, black ivory. These are the words of Amiri Baraka. And I'm going to go off. You will see that I am in a location, not my office. These are the words of Amiri Baraka, renowned writer, poet, Black American, who has inspired my work. And I am sure now that some of you have heard this name, if you've never heard the name before, you will also perhaps check his work. They are in tribute to all those, our ancestors, my ancestors, our African ancestors who lost their lives intentionally, willfully, inadvertently, accidentally, or, as in the case of the Zong, by brutal means of assassination. I'm Sonia Salinaya, Director of the Center for Reparation Research. I'm pleased to see so many participants in today's webinar, The Visual Life of the Middle Passage Memory in the African Diaspora. The Center for Reparation Research sits on the land which once was a forced residence of more than 400 enslaved Africans, the old Mona and Papine plantations. The UWI Mona campus recognizes and declares that the land on which we operate as an institution of higher learning is the original or traditional territory of many peoples. The UWI acknowledges a First Nation comprising the indigenous people who were displaced by the Columbus Project and general European colonization, and the hundreds of Africans who toiled for more than 100 years as enslaved people on the old pea and sugar estate. The UWI recognizes their labor and sacrifices in preserving this land that has enabled the establishment of a university that now provides opportunities for many of their descendants to receive an education that they themselves were denied. As an academic and researcher, I have long reflected on the horrors of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans to the Caribbean in my own work. And of course, we could not therefore resist the call from Ms. Judith Salmon and Dr. Anna Ford Smith in the bid to host this webinar. We are pleased to partner with the team and say thanks to not only the UWI Museum team, but also the Center for Reparation Research team. We have all toiled, and you, our artists online, who will bring further insights into your work as we reflect on the visual life of Middle Passage memory. I want to say that the Center for Reparation Research plays a defining role in the study of reparatory justice initiatives and the movement globally, or mandates to educate, advocate, and research stands as our pillars to be able to connect people globally to the work that we're doing to bring attention, not only to subject matters such as the Middle Passage and the horrors, the crimes against humanity, in fact, but of course, the development plan established by the CARICOM Reparation Commission. That 10-point plan is very much squarely in our mandate. I urge you to warmly welcome our discussant, Dr. Anna Ford Smith, to the floor as we dive into the works of this distinguished group of artists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sonia. That was a wonderful intro. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the panel. Thanks to Sonia for agreeing to host this event, and also to the staff of the Center for Reparations, Mia and Tricia, for their amazing work to get this panel off the ground. I want to start with a moment of silence for those who went on the Middle Passage, were forced on the Middle Passage, but didn't make it across the Atlantic. So I'm going to ask you to just reflect silently on all those people who were lost in the journey for a few seconds. May they rest in grace and power. I come to this panel via some work that I did 10 years ago on memory in Jamaica. At the time, the terror of apartheid was being publicly memorialized, and the violent transition to neoliberalism was also being memorialized in Chile, Argentina. But I noticed that neither the violence of enslavement nor that of the post-colonial period in the Caribbean were part of this memory boom, which was often state-supported. The recognition of Black Friday, the massacre of one Rasta community, is a rare exception, as perhaps is the campus of the University of the West Indies, which integrates the past, its past as a slave plantation, as a location of a slave plantation, with the modern buildings. This panel is taking place in Kingston, where the visual traces of enslavement and resistance to it have been flattened in the race to development. Concrete high-rises and asphalts have become elaborate tombstones to forgetting. Hibbert House on Duke Street, which survives, is remembered as the home of the colonial legislature and not as the place where Thomas Hibbert kept his human cargo. On the other hand, there has been popular visual memorialization of those killed by police and by armed strongmen in inner city communities. But these memorial murals have also been destroyed. It is in the sonic that memory is best preserved, in the lyrics of Burning Spear or Marley and many others. But perhaps that is because the sonic is ephemeral. What is at stake in this elaborate destruction of memory? How is the suppression of difficult memory linked to repeating and ongoing violence? How is silencing memories of the Mafa ultimately connected to the repeating and ongoing violence that characterizes contemporary society? How is the silencing linked to the unfinished project of decolonization, to repair, to possible regeneration, and to our hopes for true emancipation? Why remember this genocidal trade in humans? What is at stake for us in this struggle to remember? How does one represent the Middle Passage ethically and in ways which don't reiterate the trauma and violence of the passage? Is such a thing even possible? Historian Robin Kelly proposes that finding and filling in the absences in the colonial records of the history of the Middle Passage is critical to decolonizing and reforming identity and community in the Black diaspora, but also beyond. Remembering can be a motivation to remake the present. Visiting this event can arouse agency, imagination, mourning, and energy. Revisiting the Middle Passage can provoke and call into being a new way of existing in the present. it can also be a way to challenge racism in the present. I'm going to ask our panelists to join us in this discussion. Guyanese artist Frank Bowling was among the first of the Caribbean artists to commemorate the Middle Passage in his painting in 1970, responding to a visual absence in early nationalist art. Since then, contemporary Black artists here in the Caribbean and all over the world have remembered the forced journey of humans from Africa to the Americas, packed into the holds of ships that made the journey. They have remembered in myriad ways. Here I'm thinking of Kyle Gooden, Tukula Ntama, and Clinton Hutton in Jamaica, whose work refuses forgetfulness. But I'm also thinking of artists all over the world, like Lubaina Himid in the UK, and Hugh Locke, of Guyanese origin, but also based in the UK, of Mahau Modisakeng in South Africa, and Betty Saar, Ayanna Jackson in the US, just to mention a few. So the struggle to remember is a global one, and the Caribbean is present globally in this struggle. The artists on our panel come from different corners of the region and of the hemisphere, I should say, of Canada, the US, and Jamaica. And I'm going to start by asking Charles Campbell to begin the conversation. Charles is a Jamaican-born multidisciplinary artist, writer, and curator, and he's based on the Lakwangan territory, which is the indigenous name for what we know as British Columbia, Victoria, British Columbia, to be precise. Charles works in digital art, but he also uses sculpture, sound, and performance. And his most recent work recreates the submerged terrain where African and North American tectonic plates converge, bringing us in proximity to the realm of spirits lost in hundreds of years of forced Atlantic crossing. His How Many Colors Has the Sea was exhibited as part of the Toronto Biennial at the Power Plant in 2024. But his work's been shown all over the Caribbean, the US, and Canada. So over to you, Charles, to start us on this exploration.
Thank you, Honor. I just wanted to start by offering a libation to our ancestors. So I know we have a brief time here. I'm going to do a presentation showing kind of the breadth of my work that considers the Middle Passage, but specifically, I'm going to bookend it looking at the first work that I from back in 1994, which was the first really to start to contend with this subject, and then talk a little bit more in detail about the last work, that How Many Colors Has the Sea. I'm going to start here, which is a painting called Lockup, which I did in 1994. It was very shortly after I moved back to Jamaica, from after being, raised largely in Canada. It was a time where I was really trying to come to terms with what Jamaica was, how the society worked, what my place was in it. And my uncle gifted me a very slim volume entitled, it was a slim leatherback piece titled An Abstract on the Evidence Delivered Before a Select Committee of the House of Commons in the years 1790 and 1791 on the part of the petitioners for the abolition of the slave trade. So a book of abolitionist testimony. I think it was the second edition. It was a slim leather-bound volume, the yellowing paper. It contained the famous print of the Brooks slave ship diagrams. And I was reading this while I was trying to understand what Jamaica was all about. And somewhere in chapter 3, which was all about the transatlantic crossing and the enormities that were being inflicted on the African cargo in those crossings. A terrible incident happened at Constant Spring lockup, which was 19 young men were rounded up by the police, shoved into a cell that was probably made for 2 or 3 people. They were not given any water, any food. There was no bathroom facilities, and there was pretty much no air in that space. They locked them up overnight, and when they opened the door, 3 men had died, including Agana Barnett. And I just was overwhelmed by the similarities between the conditions that those men were forced to endure and ultimately killed by, and the conditions I was reading about during slavery and the transatlantic crossing. And so this was kind of my first time to wrestle with these issues of how the legacies of violence and are that stem back from our quite horrific past infiltrate themselves and become present again and again in Jamaican society. So this was lockup. I'm just going to go very quickly through another series of slides here, and then I'll talk about the last work. This is But These Bodies, 4-panel work, the ocean, some text that was taken from that abolitionist testimony, which said, but these bodies actually touch one another. That's a inverted self-portrait in the 3rd panel. And again, portion of the Brooks diagram in the fourth panel. Here I was looking really at trauma and intimacy, and as a possibility of incubating intimacy. This is the transformation set. On the far left is an image of each row that you see on that kind of tight pattern on the left is actually a row taken from another, I think, the diagram of a French slave ship called the Loire, and showing the cargoing of slaves. I've turned it into this sort of tight mandala form, and considering it as kind of this root of rupture, considering various migrations represented in birds, and also considering the ocean crossings represented in the last panel with an abstracted image of the ocean. This is a close-up of that I call Middle Passage Mandala. It's again those bodies from the L'Aurore. This is my transporter series. I sort of moved into more 3-dimensional work, looking at kind of a 3-dimensional image surface, looking here at these forms that in contemporary dialogue were often thought of kind of reminiscent of Buckminster Fuller and his utopian visions, but encircling them with images from the slave trade, slave canoes, and in this case, shackle, and then backgrounded by an image of bagasse, the trash left over after sugarcane production. This is a later iteration of that same transporter series. This is exhibited at the National Gallery here in Jamaica. It shows a slave canoe, the canoes that would transport Africans from the coast to the awaiting slave ships. So not only looking at the enormities committed on Africans, but also examining complicities as well. This is Maroonscape 1. It's an image of cockpit country. It's again taking on these ideas of kind of cockpit country in the landscape presented as utopian architecture, but it's also a kind of and it's also presented as an archipelago, so a destination as well through ocean crossing. This is Maroonscape 3. This is a large tree form. It was based largely on our lungs, but looks at images of biosimilarity between the lungs and trees. And also something I don't talk about much, but also these forms were also inspired by corals. So it's also a kind of an aquatic form as well as a terrestrial form. It also references maroon territories and survival, specifically the kinda tree in Accompong. Yeah, it's Maroonscape 3, Finding Accompong. It's its full title. This is breath cycle 1. It shows the forms of, it's a kind of Mobius form, a sort of this continuous circle that wraps 3 times around. It's about kind of cyclarity. And also it's embedded in it, the images of lichen, but forget me again, it's a reference to coral, and it's floating, the way it floats, it also becomes an aquatic form that for me also kind of becomes a reference to the transatlantic slave trade. Finally, we're here at How Many Colors Has the Sea? This is the installation at the power plant gallery, and it's really this piece that I want to talk about because it's partly because of the challenge that it represented for me. It started out as a work. I just had this imagining of giving some relief really to the spirits that had been lost in the Middle Passage and creating a series of islands for them to inhabit. And I looked at these maps of the ocean floor and I started to build these sculptures that were kind of islands in the mid-Atlantic for the spirits to finally, get some air and light and breath. That work completely refused me. I can't say there's no work that I've actually worked harder on and shed more tears over than that piece, but it refused to come into being. And eventually I felt I got a really, really clear signal from the ancestors that this is not the piece I should be making, that I'm kind of approaching it all wrong, that I need to, first of all, consider the spirits where they lie, consider what they need spiritually and what we need spiritually, and to base the work on that. And it became a piece that was much more about finding a space to grieve the losses of the Middle Passage, a space of solace, a space to put us in proximity to the spirits, and allow them to allow us to communicate with them, allow our ancestors to communicate through us to them, and to come to deal with our own enormous losses. This is a larger view of it. So what you're seeing is a sort of reticulated sculpture, which again is based on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean where the African and North American plates meet. So that crinkled form is those tectonic plates crashing together. It was surrounded by these colored panels, which are breath portraits. So I've taken these recordings of people's breath from the Black community, and I've created these audio spectrograms of them. So they're each a brief moment of breath, and they stand both for the people that we're breathing and our present life, and also for, in a way, our connection to our ancestors. I went through quite a detailed process of taking people on a guided meditation where they would envision their ancestors, and then as they were doing those visualizations in the pauses between me speaking, I would record the breath, and then out of those recordings I would produce these breath portraits. There are 9 of them around the room. It's this dark blue room, which is in reference to Olokun. The dark blue, the sort of whitish pearlescence of the aluminum. And then Olokun is often referenced as having a cloak decorated with 9 colors, the colors of which aren't usually specified. And that became these 9 panels, these 9 colored panels, each representing our breath and our life. And in a way, they were the ancestors standing as protective sentinels around the space. Because what I realized when I was kind of working on the initial project, am I running out of time? Okay, I'll be quick. Was that we were really, I'm dealing with, really tortured spirits, and that I also needed to find protection for the people, for ourselves, and for the spirits themselves. So the ancestors stand sentinel. There are two other elements in the work, which are audio. One is a 6-channel audio piece that kind of moves around the room, which is the sound of taken from underwater microphones, and is punctuated by bodies plunging into this water. The last piece is a guided meditation. Again, it's a headphone audio piece where people are encouraged to envision their own losses. And I can wrap it up there. I will just say that to do this, I also was very cognizant of its context. I worked with an Indigenous elder to allow this work to happen on the territory. I did ceremony. I did a sort of 9-night ceremony during the piece to kind of actively honor the dead. And it's sort of through that, I feel the piece could only come to being through that care. And is that my time? You're on mute, Tanner. You're on mute, Tanner. I can't hear you.
Okay, I want to draw Laura into the conversation now. Laura is a Jamaican artist who is best known for her work in sculpture. And I think most people know her in Jamaica for her sculpture Redemption Song, which generated quite a controversy when it was first erected. And that controversy is in many ways indicative of the confusion, anger, and despair that surrounds the formation of our society in slavery and genocide, and the sort of refusal to reckon with it that has become, in a way, part of our own identities. But Laura's also since then produced assemblages and installation works in which he incorporates found objects with carved elements. Her work explores trauma, transformation, and transcendence, as well as the symbolic properties of everyday objects, the human body, and, like Charles, the Caribbean land and sea. She was trained in the UK and Jamaica and has shown her work in both places. Over to you, Laura.
Hello. Yes, my image is coming up. So my first work about enslavement was the Redemption Song Monument in 2003. The Crossing is my last slavery work, which is 2024. In between, I've done approximately 11 other works that relate to slavery. So you ask us, why is it important that we should remember this genocidal trade in humans? So I suggest, in order for there to be healing from trauma, the trauma must be acknowledged. That's been my personal experience. We can see that there needs to be healing because of the inequities all around us. The lack of opportunities, the perpetuation of family patterns that go way back. For example, men weren't allowed to take responsibility for the children they procreated. As a result, in modern society, some fathers still don't take responsibility for their children. Our young men around us, some of them are numb and not able to think proactively or be productive. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the works that I've done. So The Crossing, which was completed in 2024 and shown at my last exhibition, which was On the Farm, Someone who saw the crossing said that the scarred grooves at the top of the carving were the whipped backs of the enslaved. The underbelly of the carving is the waves of the Atlantic as seen from underwater. The sculpture speaks. Oops, how does it move? Can you get me to move it? There. The sculpture speaks. I am the beast. I stand on top of an old sugar boiling cauldron that can no longer boil. Victory. This is a memorial piece that acknowledges the past and encourages healing from the past. So underneath the sculpture, you see the waves. And for me, it's like you're swimming and looking up at the surface of the sea, or it could be just the waves on the top of the sea. And at the top of the sculpture, you see the scored marks that, and that's a lovely big old sugar boiling cauldron that used to boil sugar, but it can't do it anymore. This is my last enslavement piece. I feel very clear about that. I've just somehow, I'm done. The piece that I did in 2019 is called Heart of a Man. A man is a protector, a woman is a nurturer. As men were shackled on ships and crossed the Atlantic, they heard their families screaming for help. They could not help. Their hearts were ripped from their chests. This installation is bringing attention to the fact that men carry their own pain, a counterbalance to the women's Me Too movement. This next piece is called Guide Their Way Home. This installation acknowledges the terror and abuse passed down through intergenerational trauma, carried deep within the national psyche. Guide Their Way Home is a reflection upon and an invitation to let go the suppressed pain carried within. It opens the door and invites change. Guide Their Way Home refers to these spirits being given safe passage, as Melda Darling sings, "Guide me, O great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou Almighty." How do we proceed in this world, with its trials and tribulations? How may we serve the greater good? How may we heal ourselves and repair the traumas of our forefathers so these don't repeat into the future? 62 men and 63 women. This is a dugout cottonwood canoe placed atop of rocks, mimicking dry stone walls built by enslaved people. The canoe is filled with lines of single-file women and men walking up its belly. There is a Mount Plenty fabric inventory that lists these enslaved men and women and farm animals, stating how much each is worth, illustrating the hellish circumstances of the past. On the day this installation was presented, the canoe was surrounded by 9-night singers, jonquillo dancers, as a celebration in honor of the ancestors listed on the inventory. Those who danced and sang could have been descended from those on the list, as they carried the same names and still live near the Mount Plenty farm. So I live on the Mount Plenty farm, and my mother, bless her heart, she always wanted to know, where did she live, who lived there, and she found this inventory, which I eventually incorporated into my work. That was 62 men and 63 women. The next piece is called "The Hanging of Fibber and the Boneyard." This piece represents humanity's fight for a conscience, the antidote for which is provided in the words of Paul Farini, a modern-day mystic poet, which accompanied my work. This installation was inspired by William Blake's drawing of a Negro hung by the ribs and was made for all women who have been harmed deeply. So this is the female version of Heart of a Man, was the male version. And the poem says, I am a thought without limitation, for I am ever expanding into formlessness. There is no form that can contain me. I have joined with God in perfect forgiveness. I am free of guilt. I am free of grievances. I do not believe that I can be wronged, nor do I believe that I have the power to wrong another. For I know without doubt that every being has equality. Now, this is a very hard poem to really say, yeah, can we do this? Can we really be free of grievances? And for what I've discovered for myself is that if I carry anger in my body, I'm actually destroying my body, and it just creates pain and discomfort. So I have worked very hard to get to this place that the poem invites us to get to. And interestingly enough, when I exhibited Their Spirits Gone Before Them at the Liverpool Museum in 2014, this poem was written on the wall along with my Weeping in the Blood prints. This De Hanging of Fibber was taken from the Weeping prints. And there was a gentleman who read the poem, and he just turned to me and said, for the first time in my life, I feel peace. And that was huge for me to see that my work can be healing for others. The next piece I'm showing you is called Their Spirits Gone Before Them. This piece is essentially about that life can change and how the body may be enslaved, but our souls are free. Then, of course, we have, I went a bit quickly there. There are 1,357 miniatures inside the canoe. And then, of course, there's Redemption Song. Redemption Song is about our souls being free, with the water washing away the trauma of the past. None but ourselves can free the mind. Redemption Song is a prayer. Each of us has the potential to heal one by one. So you also asked, what is at stake in this struggle to remember? Our dignity, our humanity. I feel that when everyone has access to good healthcare and good education, this is the minimum we should accept. That's, for me, what reparations is about. I think I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I was muted. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for reminding us that the question of internal freedom or the question of spiritual freedom is also balanced by the materialities around us, by the legacies of slavery in the present, through the absence of equality, through the perpetuation of material violence, slow violence, bone-breaking violence, which we all have to struggle against. Emancipation is also about material change. So I want to go now to Judith Salmon, whose idea this panel was, and who whose visit to Senegal, to the door of no return there, which is the door that people who were captured and enslaved had to go through to get onto the boats that would bring them to the Americas. Her trip there triggered a kind of epiphany, and it made her really committed to the question of the meaning of revisiting this memory. What does revisiting this memory allow and provoke for us? Judith's work rests on two important pillars, printmaking and painting, and her latest body of work, Home to Self, was shown at the Olympia Gallery last year. It was a partial retrospective. Judith was born in Kingston in 1952, and she has exhibited both here in the Caribbean and in the US. She is relentlessly committed to exploring the meanings of the Mafa, or the Middle Passage. And so over to you, Judith.
My honor, thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for being here. It wasn't my idea. It wasn't a singular idea, but it was a jointly discussed idea. And I'm glad that you could participate. I'm going to start my sharing with this work, which is an installation made from wax. It's maybe comprises about 30 pairs of wax feet. Some of them have broken up over the years, and in traveling, transporting them, they broke. And wax was a perfect material for taking an impression of the feet. And why the feet? Because I just felt like the feet it's a signature of where we've been in this life. Our feet carry us forward. I mean, okay, some people don't have feet, but it's just the idea of moving forward in life. The feet symbolize that for me. And these were my own feet. So this suggests the journey of the Middle Passage and many, many diasporas, because it's called Travelers All. And out of that many centuries of transporting and relocating people, eventually we peopled most of the Western world. Black people are pretty much everywhere, and people like to say Jamaicans are everywhere. Yes, we do find ourselves everywhere, trying out new conditions. So back to the material, the ephemeral nature of wax, it also emphasizes the impermanence and the precarious nature of humanity and of human conditions. So wax is very changeable, and wax is very okay, thank you. So moving on, here is the sort of total installation, and this was shown at the Olympia exhibition last year. And it was interesting to me that these young men stood almost in reverence, trying to figure out. I'm sure they knew what it was, but it has absorbed their attention for quite a while. And I found that they took a picture of it, and I found it really compelling. These are modern young men, as you can see, contemporary people, and they're reflecting on, which is what we want to do, reflect on the past and how we can heal the wounds and trauma of the past. So the objects evoke a sense of absence, although they are very much present. You know, they're molds made from people's feet, from my feet. So there's a presence there, it came from a human form, but there's an absence. There's a whole cavity inside. So that is there's that contradiction, you know. So in our lives, we have to deal with this notion of absences. That's a part of the whole Middle Passage and our lives as Caribbean people, really. A lot of absence. Small seeds of pimento, a Caribbean spice, actually fills the interior and imply a new possibility. In the Caribbean, we use pimento for all kinds of purposes, culinary purposes, as well as fermenting wines and so on. But, you know, you just throw it in a pot if you're cooking a stew or a soup, and it brings a great flavor, lovely flavor to your food. So I threw them in these feed forms, and I must say that it was, when I did these abroad, it was much easier to find pimento, funny enough, at the local Caribbean store. It's not easy to find pimento in Kingston for some reason. But they imply the possibility of refashioning ourselves, refashioning our communities and our identities. And I'm moving on to the second piece called Imprint. And this painting is 147 by 122 centimeters. And in the Caribbean, our lives are like palimpsests, as an imprint of our past shows up in various ways. Somebody mentioned that, I think Charles mentioned it in his talking about one of his earlier works, that the past shows up. The past really is not very far away. It shows up in language, it shows up in movement, it shows up even in our culinary choices. And like in the physical world, in the built world, it shows up in even the architecture. You know, I'm fascinated by the aqueduct on campus here that was built to ferry water to the different parts of the plantation. The painting is created with textures laid on the surface and then scraped away over and over. Early marks are still visible faintly, and they relate to the present. They relate to what, you know, you'll probably see the present marks, the bolder ones, the more determinative ones, but the underbody relates. And that's how palimpsests work. Palimpsests refer to old manuscripts that were scraped away, and because the hide or the skin that was made, that the palimpsest, the manuscript was written on, was so expensive that monks in those days, they would scrape them down and rewrite a new book or a pamphlet on them. So what happened was, after a couple hundred years, the old ink started to bleed through. And so it happens in our lives, the past bleeds through. So what do we do when the past comes forward? We have to acknowledge it, you know, as Laura says, you know, we have to talk about the trauma. We have to acknowledge our ancestors who have gone and sacrificed earlier. So in the forefront of this print is a vertical kind of hold, a ship's hold, and overlaying that is a poem by the Negritude statesperson called Aimé Césaire. And that was a poem to hope and a poem about ourselves as being valuable. The canvas is joined by stitches. You know, somehow in my work, I do a lot of stitching. And so stitches join, they bring the past and the present together, and they add another texture, another kind of depth to a two-dimensional work. And so the central canvas is stitched, and the sort of orangey part is stitched to the blue part, you know, and just like islands, we are all anchored in some way to our past, right? This painting from this series is called The Witness. Again, it's acrylic on canvas, 127 by 122 centimeters. It's a brooding painting in which which speaks of loss. And the color blue is very emphatic here, because blue for me really speaks a lot about what we have lost. So the dark hole rises from a murky surface and a figure leans forward. I don't know if you can see that figure. A figure leans forward, observing the afterlife of the Middle Passage, where Black people in marginal communities are at risk of being re-traumatized, dehumanized, or killed. The figure in the witness is witness to the unequal value of place and the unequal value that is shown to, you know, all human beings, you know, not all, but, you know, marginal people. And we're reminded of the killing of George Floyd in Minnesota, and where power is just so unmoderated, and of the high homicide rates in Jamaica. And these are some of the after features of the Middle Passage. This painting is called Emerging. And so what are we emerging from? A figure is in a very calm space, moving forward, it seems. One foot seems to be moving forward. And the space is sort of lit by yellows and warm yellows and oranges, complemented by blue. The figure is guided by a bird high above, a symbol of the Yoruba healing entity called Osanyen. What is this person emerging? From what is she emerging? Remnants of the hold, the bits of our slave past are still evident. And there's a powerful roiling element of disturbance still around. But nevertheless, she has found something and she's moving forward. Rex Nettleford speaks of smadification, reclaiming ourselves from the exile of hatred, self-hatred, and low self-value. While Marcus Garvey speaks of mentally emancipating ourselves, self-repair is necessary. It's a necessary part of the reparation mission. And so we come to a series of smaller canvases, which talk about the journey. They're called Journey Series. And I did these directly after a visit to Senegal. And it took me a few months to sort of reconcile what I had experienced there. And I really wept a lot into these canvases. So somehow the blue seemed to be the color that triggers all of that sadness. You know, you need to get it out. This one is a rupture. It speaks of separation, a separation of the fabric of society and community. This was how this is what happened in Africa when millions were torn out and transported and enslaved. A second one in the series talks about return. And there's a story told about captured Africans who, when they landed in the Carolinas and intuited the conditions that they were going to have to endure, they walked back in their shackles. They walked under the water. They walked back to Africa. And this last one in the series is called Through the Needle's Eye. And this is a metaphor that's borrowed from the New Testament. Perhaps it's in the Old Testament too, I don't know, but there's talk about it in the New Testament. And according to Stuart Hall, the longing for return to the motherland cannot really be physically realized, but can only be psychologically and mentally realized. And as we know, Africans in the New World have formed many kinds of syncretic religious experiences. And we have realized Africa in so many ways, really.
Edith, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're way over. It's,
all right.
I
Thank
didn't
you,
want to
Anna.
interrupt, but can you wrap up?
Yes. Well, I'm going to wrap up with this last one, which it's a bench. It's a bench and it's been carved. It says, "Mouth a laugh, but heart a leap." And that is from our Jamaican proverbs, one of our Jamaican proverbs. And so coming from our years growing up, our ancestors, our grandmothers and people before try to teach us the lessons that we need to go forward with. And it's a way of coping, mouth a laugh, but heart a leap. Think about that. What does that mean? Okay. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, Judith. I want to introduce Camille Turner, who was born in Kingston, but raised in Hamilton, Ontario. She's a scholar and artist whose practice spans a variety of media. She does work with social practice, with performance, and with printmaking. Her work has been critical in Canada to the question of asserting the reality of Black Canada. In fact, she's part of a movement of Black artists, which include Charles, who have had to really struggle to make clear that there is such a thing as African Canadian identity, because the country is seen as relentlessly white in spite of Indigenous presence there. Camille was born here, as I said, but she currently lives and works in Los Angeles. So we have artists from the West Coast of North America, as well as from the region. She's held solo and group exhibitions nationally, and like many of our other panelists, has won a number of awards, including the Exhibition of the Year award for her most recent exhibition in Toronto. Over to you, Camille, to be the last voice of this afternoon's panel.
Thank you so much, Honor. Going to share. Oh. Are you seeing my slides? Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to be in conversation with these amazing artists. I'm looking forward to the discussions. So the work that I do is about home and belonging. And part of that is honoring those who came before me. I'm the descendant of Africans who survived a genocide. And when I look into the archive to find their stories, what I find are numbers. I find the millions that were stolen from their homelands. Millions died on the long march to the ocean. Saidiya Hartman talks about the trail of bleached bones that led from the hinterland to the sea. Millions died during the Middle Passage. Their stories are abstracted as numbers in shipping logs, insurance claims, profit and loss statements. So as an artist, what I try to do is to transform the violence and indifference that frames their stories in the archive. So I'm going to give you an example of how I do that through my latest artwork entitled 80 Died of Flux and Flu. So for the last decade or so, I've been doing this work around slave ships that were constructed in Newfoundland. Yes, Newfoundland. Um, and so this is one of those pieces. Let me see. The title of the piece came from a letter written in 1790 that was sent to James Rogers, who was the owner of a slave ship called the Sarah. And this is a vessel that was constructed in Newfoundland in 1788. Now, the text says, "Gentlemen, I have the pleasure to acquaint you with the safe arrival of your brig Sarah by Captain Goodrich this morning with 142 slaves." Now, the money generated from the sale of these trafficked people is estimated at about 8,000 pounds, which would translate in today's currency. Um, in today's currency, it's about 1.6 million pounds or over $2 million. Now, this is a significant amount of money. But in the next piece of news that is delivered almost as an aside, having buried 80 slaves with the flux and fever. So when these 80 people died, they would have been just thrown overboard. No names, no ceremony, no acknowledgement, just an entry on a ledger. The brutal arithmetic of slavery reduces them to inventory, written off as a financial loss. So I can find the names of the owners of the vessel, the investors, the crew members, those who provisioned the ships, but I can't find a single name of any of the 80 Africans who perished in the hold of this ship. The archive withholds their humanity. So I wanted to create a way to bring them back into memory without reproducing the spectacle of Black suffering. I wanted to find a way to sit with and contemplate this violence rather than illustrating it. I wanted to find a way to mourn these lives as human lives and invite others to participate. So I decided to create a film and an intimate ceremony. Um, so what I did is I washed 80 stones and wrapped each of them with white linen as an act of care and as a way to mark their passing and to honor them. So I'm going to share a couple of minutes of this piece, 80 Died of Flux and Flu, so you can experience how I approach this remembering. Uh-oh. Realizing that you probably can't. Okay, I think I have to do this. Can you hear the sound? Can't hear. Jeez. Make sure loud. I'm not quite sure why you can't hear the sound. I'm sorry about that. The sound is an important part of the presentation. Um, any any technical sort of, yeah. Anyway, I'm not quite sure why you can't hear. Sorry about that. Um, Let me go back to the presentation then. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry about the sound. So this piece was an attempt to make space for what the archive could not hold. And as you can see in the installation of it, what I did is I had the 80 stones that were wrapped in the center of the space, and I had seats for people to sit around the space and to just engage with the loss. And it's been interesting because it's at a university museum, University of Amherst. It's part of my exhibition called Land of the Free, and it's currently on view there right now. So I've been in touch with them to find out, what's happening and the way that people are taking up this work. So it's been really wonderful to hear that this piece has begun lots of conversations and yeah. The Yeah, so I'm just gonna touch my presentation will be very short because had wanted to show you that piece, but it doesn't make sense if you can't hear it. So I just touch on another piece that's in that show currently. It's called Fly. And the so in my work I try to conjure new possibilities and dream new futures. And Fly was actually named after the slave ship called the Fly. And that this was a ship that was constructed in Newfoundland. The people in the hold of the ship were rescued by Africans on the shore. Um, and since the name of the ship was the Fly, I responded by creating a video about flying Africans. And this is a common trope. It's a story that's throughout the diaspora, the African diaspora. Everywhere that we were, these stories follow. So that story that Judith was talking about, for instance, the Igbo landing, that's a story of flying Africans. Some say they walked underneath the water all the way back home to Africa, and some people say they flew. So it's a story of return. And so the Fly, the piece called Fly that I created is um yeah, I basically created this piece where people go to the edge of the water, they lift their arms and they fly. Um yeah, so it's conjuring the idea of return to homelands, to kin, returning to wholeness. And I'm just gonna talk about this one last piece, and it's called Worthy. And this is in process right now. It will be a part of my retrospective that will open in Hamilton, Ontario, um, in this summer. So uh, June 25th or 26th, save the date. Um, so this is so in the creation of this particular work, I came face to face with the proximity of my own history to the transatlantic trade of Africans. Worthy is an immersive video installation, and it's narrated by my 90-year-old father, Lloyd Turner. He was born on the Worthy Park estate. And he tells the story of his early years when our family lived there. Now, Worthy Park, as I found out from Honor, this is about 10 years ago, Honor, when I was studying with you. This is when I found out that Worthy Park had been a slave plantation. Because all my life I heard him talk about Worthy Park, but I had no idea. Um, so it's the former slave plantation in St. Catharines, Jamaica. After slavery ended, the formerly enslaved rented land from the owners. They built their homes there, they built their lives there, but they could never own that land. And in 1945, when my dad was 9 years old, the owners of Worthy Park evicted all the families who had lived there for generations. Their homes were demolished, and my dad says that was to expand their golf course because at the time they were really big into golf. So that's what they did. Um, so dad remembers walking through his family across cow pastures with all their worldly possessions on their heads. And Worthy Park is now one of the largest and oldest rum producers on the island. Last February, when I came to Jamaica to film this, we went on a rum tour of Worthy Park. Um, there's no acknowledgement of slavery on that tour. There was no mention of the displacement of my family and the other families whose stolen labor built their wealth. Um, I began this presentation stating that I am the descendant of Africans who survived the genocide. This history is still in living memory. My father is the archive. Um, when he was a child, he listened to stories of elders whose parents had been enslaved. What's at stake in remembering is not just history, it's preserving and passing on these stories for future generations and taking responsibility for repairing the rupture. To you. Um, uh-oh, how do I stop the share?
Thanks, Camille, and thanks to everyone. There's so many overlapping elements in your presentations. I want to give you a chance to talk with each other. I'm thinking here about the juxtaposition of past and present. In the beginning, I talked about work to commemorate those who are dying now in contemporary state violence, and also in sort of the reiteration of internalized trauma when we turn violence against each other. Um, Camille refers to that in her presentation. So too does Charles in his work, where he shows the relationship between the Middle Passage imagery and the current position of people who are in lockup in Kingston. In particular, I remember going to the General Penitentiary once and passing out in shock at the conditions that people were kept in. And what immediately came to mind, of course, was the slave auction market. And it was decades later that I found out that General Penitentiary is actually built on the site of a correctional facility that was used during slavery. So the conditions are very much still the same. All of this part of the creation of racial capitalism, the system in which we live, in which profit is held privately, and everyone's place in the system is orchestrated according to phenotype and the color of one's skin. So I want to open up now to everyone to ask you to talk with each other about your work. It's quite different, but there are also overlaps, and to really engage with the work that you've presented.
Can I just jump in?
Of course, yes.
Camille, is your father still alive?
Yeah, he is.
Does he can talk to you? He can tell
Oh
you.
yeah. He remembers everything. He has a Loctite memory. And yeah, these are stories of my family that he's kept all these years. So it was such a privilege to be able to work with him.
Right. How old is he?
What's that?
Is he? He is how old?
Oh, he's 91 now.
And okay, Worthy Park evicted him and his family from the land.
Mhm.
Was there no compensation?
Oh,
No,
no, nothing. And
nothing.
no acknowledgement. It's not written in any history books. I could not find it anywhere. Yeah. And
But
I'm
actually,
sure that this is something that's repeated, you know, in many other places.
yes, it is.
This is not you know, it's not just my family and that community. This is everywhere. Yeah.
This is a repeating story from enslavement, the eviction of people from the estates after emancipation. There is still people being evicted even now through various processes. Rachel Goff's work is on landlessness as a result of these processes. So these are still ongoing issues. And Worthy Park is just one of many estates in which this happened and is continuing to happen.
I suppose that they feel they own the land, and that's that.
That is that. Yeah. And and you know, the stolen labor doesn't figure
Doesn't
into.
factor into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So
What you're minded to tell them, just present the story to them.
that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I'm struck by the difference between being here in Jamaica right now and living in Canada, and kind of the closer proximity to the kind of these legacies of violence, and the kind of ability of in the Canadian culture to kind of have these amnesias, and to kind of pave, nice it over in a way, and erase it, where it seems like in Jamaica there is a way that it's always bubbling up. It's like this active ferment. And I guess my question for folks is, like, there's kind of two trends in some of the work I'm seeing. One is around this sort of the kind of spiritual reckoning that we have to do, and reconciliation with those pasts, and making amends, that like those acts of care that you've done, Camille. And then there's also the kind of political import, the kind of the active acts of dispossession, the active acts of violence that are being maintained. And I just wondered if people wanted to say something about the relationship between those two things, and how you saw them in your work, or more generally.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't consider myself an advocate for anything really. I talk about Black culture, and some of my work borders on politics, especially the works I did around Garvey. But I just think I will lend my work to efforts to advocate for whatever it is, whether it's against gender-based violence or whatever. I will lend my work, but I myself, I don't feel like I would lead a march, or I feel like my thing is to observe, do the work, share the work, and let other people experience it through that little visual package. That's how I feel about all that's going on. At 73, I kind of feel I can step back and not be out there really, and just do what I can do. But I wanted to ask you something, Charles. You did some work you did a piece called A Maroon Landscape. And I'm curious about what was that made of? It seemed to be many layers of something plastic or rubbery. What was it really? Is that a landscape?
That piece is actually made of essentially mat board that you use to,
Oh,
um,
just layers of mat board built up.
that's
Okay.
into form. Yeah.
Okay.
I
And
want.
painted.
What was that, Judith?
And painted, of course.
Black mat board that was so it was it was black mat board that was cut into a three-dimensional form that kind of followed the terrain. I mean, it uses the terrain of cockpit country.
Yes.
Maps out the terrain of cockpit country is and the idea was to kind of combine these I make it in a way like an architectural model. So I was reading a lot and looking at a lot of these kind of architectural models of utopias and so on, and then
I see. Okay.
of the landscape that was used here as a tool of survival, and a different kind of type of social organization that that would come out of that, rather than the kind of almost often hierarchical or centralized forms that you often see in a lot of other renditions of utopian architecture. I was trying to use the landscape as that form, but the material was a black mat board, which was the kind of to work. Made it work.
There's an exhibition. Yes, it does work. There's an exhibition downstairs, part of the whole Middle Passage program that is going on here now. And one of the artists, Takula Natama, she has sort of found recycled bits of fabric, plastic. It's just really interesting. It was sort of moving along behind when Professor Naya was speaking. It was moving, but it was just interesting how she garnered all of these odds and ends. I mean, they're not they're not, you couldn't call them like mat board and cutting them down or whatever. She just found odds and ends, wrappers, bottles washing up in the water, plastic, wool, whatever, and put them. It's so interesting, so I think that's a very big statement, not only about the environment, but about how we survive in bits and pieces, Yeah.
That actually reminds me of a piece that I did in Newfoundland where I had a conversation with the ocean and I just brought together everything that the ocean gave me. I made into these sculptures. It's called Sticks and Bones.
Okay.
And yeah, so
How big did it get? Was it that piece that I saw that was like an extended piece like this, and a long piece of work?
It was actually displayed on a long black table, and there
I think
was
I saw a
there
photograph
was
of it. Yeah.
about 19 objects because I wanted them
Yeah.
to represent the 19 ships that I found that were made in Newfoundland for the
Okay.
transatlantic trade. Yeah.
So your research showed you that the Newfoundland was a very important shipbuilding port for the slave trade.
It was, and it's so interesting because, of course, I wasn't the first person to talk about it. It's just that no one sort of really dug into it, and yeah, so presenting this work has kind of changed the conversation in Newfoundland.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, so I really feel that art can be so powerful in terms of I'm working with Charmaine Nelson right now. She has a research lab called Slavery North at University of UMass Amherst. And she talks about how, artists are important. A lot of people aren't going to read the textbooks and, the things that the books that are being written, but people will come to exhibitions. People will hear about these things. And I think it's really important, the work that we're doing, even if we don't know what the response is going to be. It's it's bringing something into the world.
It
One of
is
the things,
giving birth, yeah.
yeah. One of the things I keep thinking about though is when I went to Jamaica, I felt almost overwhelmed. You cannot step anywhere where there wasn't a slave plantation, you know? I find that sense of overwhelm really palpable. And yet, and you're saying, Charles, that yes, there's all kinds of stuff coming up to the surface, but I feel like people kind of live with this history without acknowledging it directly. Do you know what I mean? Like in a way, it's just like almost like the air that we breathe, but it's not something that you think about. My dad was born on a slave plantation, but I don't think everybody, consciously thought about what it is that this is just how it is. That is how people think. It's just you get on with it. It's how it is. But creating work in the context of this place, I just wondered how you sort of, I don't know, like,
For Laura as well, which you kind of began saying, this is your final work on slavery, and I look at many of I have the fortune of being here now, and this is all of Laura's like tremendously beautiful work around me, and many much more abstract pieces than these direct references to slavery, but I see them so embodied in a kind of a kind of spiritual struggle, and there's like biomorphic forms that are trying to emerge, and there's a way that the I don't know, the struggle and the kind of the spirit of that is still for me very present in the work, even though you say, oh, it's not this, you're not doing figures that are in a canoe that are directly illustrative of slavery, but for me I still see a really strong connection. And in a way, the more abstract the work becomes, the more it becomes about the kind of spiritual power underneath it, rather than about the kind of the literal translations of this. I wanted to like mostly say that and see what your perspective on that, because that denial honestly didn't read true to me. I'm not doing work on slavery anymore. It's like you totally are, and I just wanted to so
Yeah.
your perspective was on that, whether it is a conscious thing that's emerging or how you relate.
I don't know. I just feel like I'm done. I feel like I've moved on, but I love what you say. And I would like to let a few years go by and a few pieces go by. I just see what they're saying, when I started doing the work, I didn't plan it. I mean, Redemption Song was a competition. I entered the competition. I never imagined I would really win. It was a blind competition. So they didn't even know who they picked as the winner. And then I think they were horrified after they the wrong what's it, color, the wrong whatever, but here I am, and that was the first piece, and then one thing led to another. I did another one in 2006, and then another in 2016, and so on. So there were big gaps between, but it just happened that way.
But Laura, I love how you brought in the revivalists. Are they revivalists, those singers and musicians?
nice.
They're revivalists. I love that. And they're from the community around, right?
No, I met
They're
them
not
in St. Anne's Bay. They're from Brownstown area.
Brownstown. Mm-hmm.
Guys, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we do have questions coming in from the audience. This is fascinating, but there are a couple of questions that I think we need to address. The first one that's come in, and we can still take more questions from the audience. There's a question here from someone called Kathy Foley Meyer, and her question is, are there any current legal recourse? Is there any current legal recourse for reclamation or compensation for the theft of land? Any of you have a response to that?
I haven't heard of it. I haven't heard of it. And I think that in Worthy Parks, in there, for instance, it's their land and they owned it and they just decided, we want it now, and even though your father had been living on it for however many years, they just said, well, that's it. We need it. You're out. I mean, and sadly, your father didn't have anyone to back him or to help him, or he didn't know where he could go.
I don't think there's anything they could do, really. And he was a little boy when this happened.
That could have been, I mean, you've been living on a land longer than 7 years. You can claim the right.
Adverse possession.
If you've been
Adverse
living it,
possession.
only if you've been living there without knowledge of the owner. So it's carefully organized. So it's very difficult for people whose families came hundreds of years ago and who were on the land as enslaved people to claim ownership of estate land, because it has to be, as far as I'm aware, I don't think the law has changed, that the owner does not know that you're living there. There have been a couple of, first of all, let me say, Jamaica has never had land reform. There have been little attempts at land reform in the past. Some of us will remember the attempts in the 70s and the furor that was unleashed by any attempt at land reform back then. There have been various land settlement schemes, and most recently, there have been attempts to encourage people who do not have title to get land.
Yes,
but
that is true.
No
Titling
movement
part.
of landless people in Jamaica. Unlike Brazil, which has a massive movement of landless people, we have not got one. And the question is why? So, there's a lot of work to be done to bring about this emancipation. And one of the big questions which underlie the question of forgetting what has happened and this elaborate attempt to conceal the horrible violence out of which we were all made, is this question of land. And if you go back far enough, all the land is stolen because it was indigenous people's land. And it was conquered first by the Spanish and then by the French. So if you go back far enough, you have a really big problem with what Laura's called an attempt to keep our conscience alive, and our attempt to live a life of conscience. And I think this is something that we all have to grapple with at a personal level and at a material level, especially those of us like myself who benefited from the past by inheriting unasked for privileges. As a near-white Jamaican, I have inherited massive privilege out of that background. And there is a conspiracy of silence about talking about it. I want to ask you guys if you disagree with me. I'm trying to provoke you here to see what you have to say. Some of you say you don't agree that there is amnesia. You feel that there is evidence of slavery everywhere. I feel there's evidence of cover-up. What do you think?
Well, in Jamaica, you can refer to that Proverbs that say, I no see heart no leap. In other words, we have simple ways of, if you don't see a problem, you're not going to take it on. You're too busy hurrying and hustling and getting on with your life. So we are very good at covering and faking it till we can make it. And I think the average person they're politicized, but not in the way that's useful to building the society in general. They're politicized in a tribal kind of way. And so it's what the leader of the tribe can bring you, and what belonging to that tribe can where it can get you to go, and so on. But like civic awareness and even, our rights as citizens, that's not such a big deal. People go along because, I mean, I think this is part of the whole urban culture, yeah.
What is part of the whole urban culture? Sorry, didn't
People
get.
going along instead of, there's not a lot, maybe in the 70s, there was more sense of, we can protest or we can make our voices heard. But these days, I don't think that is really part of what Jamaica is. Right now, people go along. They want to get along with their lives. If they can't get a visa and they have to live here, they have to find a way to go along, unfortunately. So,
Laura, there's a question for you from the audience. Do you have any recordings of the performances? Example, 62 men and 63 women. Do you have any recordings of that which are public or which you can share?
I probably could dig them up. I wouldn't be able to do it this moment, but I'll try and put it on my Instagram at the earliest possible convenience.
Thank you. Okay, this is the call for last rounds. I think we've done most of the questions so far. And so I just want to ask you, panelists, if you have any last minute reflections that you'd like to leave with us before I try to wrap up and close the panel.
Thank you. It was an honor and a pleasure to be here. You want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what you're saying around kind of amnesia and also this kind of cultural emergence is they're both true. There is sort of this active acts of cover up that are engaged in, and I feel like it has. I'm seeing more and more artists, more and more writers, more and more, people with spiritual practices that kind of they're dealing with these histories, and they are emerging in such powerful ways. And I feel like it's maybe a little bit because we are in a moment where some of us have a little bit of privilege that we can kind of start to take stock of like I have the time to mourn where a lot of people were denied that. And I think we need to take the time to kind of make space for our own humanity and make sure others have space for their humanity. And sometimes that means kind of giving up some of our privilege as well.
And in fact, reparation really means repairing the self first. I think we have to do a lot of that self-repair, whether you come from a privileged position or not, you have to work out what is what's at lost, what you have lost in yourself. What do you need to rebuild in yourself? And I think if we as artists can follow that call, then I think that we will put out the type of work that people can respond to, without saying you're going to be a big advocate for X, Y, and Z. But if you begin with yourself and do the mending there, the suturing and the mending there, then I think it extends outward, in my opinion, really. Laura, you are agreeing?
I am definitely agreeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Thank
you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna. Thanks, everybody. It's been great.
I want to end with a couple of points which arise from everything that we've been talking about. Aaron Kamagishu, who is a Barbadian academic who's written a wonderful book called Beyond Coloniality, characterizes this moment in the Caribbean as one of torpor, of an inability to move, a kind of lethargy that envelops a society. Perhaps that lethargy has something to do with this amnesia and with the consequences of this amnesia, not just in Jamaica, but also globally. We can witness amnesia's consequence in the rise of genocidal fascism in Europe and North America, and also in some parts of the global South. So nothing can be more urgent to consider at this particular moment as progress pours concrete and asphalt all over this Star Apple Kingdom, rips up the last remnants of Taino culture, bulldozes the graves of the enslaved, raises centuries-old trees that are the dwelling houses of birds, ancestral spirits, and other forms of non-human life, and disposes the children of the Middle Passage from access to land, to sea, to beach, and to river that we all need to live in this place we call home. The American writer Toni Morrison leaves us with a philosophical thought. She tells us that perhaps we cannot repair the damage done by this terrible history. But she says, sometimes you don't survive whole. You just survive in part. But the grandeur of life is that attempt. It's not about solution. It's about being as fearless as one can under completely impossible circumstances. It is that makes us elegant. Survival, blossoming, and endurance are just more compelling intellectually. And that's the quote I'd like to leave with you as we end. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to the UWI, the Center for Reparations, the wonderful staff that accompanied us on this process. And thanks to every one of our amazing artists. May you go forward and keep poking us to confront the actual hold of the ship, encouraging us to get down into that nasty hold of the ship and think about what it means for us in the present. Good afternoon, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, Anna, so much. And just before everyone goes, I'm coming on from the Center for Reparation Research, and we're just so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you to the artists, both online and those who provided pieces for the exhibit at the UE Regional Headquarters. I just want to let you know that we will have the recording available from this webinar, hopefully up on our YouTube by next week. You'll be able to find us at the Center for Reparation Research on YouTube and CRR_UWI on Instagram. So please keep in touch, and we hope that you will continue to support both the artists and the work of the Center for Reparation Research and the UE Museum. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.